Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday night's Bible study. Apologies for the late start. Those of you that were with us earlier will know why. If you're listening to this on our YouTube channel, then welcome, and you won't mind that we were late because it won't be late for you. Tonight we are on our third session looking at the book of Habakkuk. And the book of Habakkuk, it's a book that you need to look at and look at and look at again and look at again. And we've seen in the first two sessions that Fiona and I see the book differently, but the same. We see it differently but the same. I think it's one of the attractions for us is that we teach independently and we get to see what we agree on and what we don't, or what we pick out and what we don't. And my memory from last week is not that good. In fact, my memory from yesterday is not that great. That's why people like Mary write notes, so she can look back and see. But I do remember from last week that the book of Habakkuk, Fiona said, was a clarion call for the Reformation. Habakkuk was an important book for the reformers. It was the text that bullied Luther into understanding true righteousness. Not a righteousness that was somehow suddenly possible because of the gospel, but a righteousness that was always available to those that would trust God in difficult circumstances. If we need a picture of someone who trusted God in difficult circumstances, you can't get a better example of God the Father being trusted by God the Son, that he would essentially, I feel like, delivered by God the Holy Spirit. There's a picture of difficult circumstances. There's a picture of complete abandonment. There's a picture of betrayal, of failure in the world's eyes to achieve the world's objectives. And perhaps because our model of the greatest hero or the greatest role model doesn't achieve things that the world would want him to achieve, perhaps that's sometimes why we struggle in this world to make sense of what it is to be a believer in God and to trust the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with not just our lives now, but our lives in eternity, and not just our lives, but the lives of everyone we know and love. It's all too easy to have a faith that you trust if everything goes the way you want it to go. I remember when I was a new believer, hadn't had the life as a believer knock wisdom into me, as Simon Ellman was talking about earlier. And I'd been in that honeymoon period where everything had gone right, and whatever, I didn't even notice what had gone wrong because I was so in love, so infatuated. And then I remember something did go wrong. And I remember talking to an older Christian, and the guy said to me, you know, Jesus is not a magician who pulls a rabbit out of a hat. He's the sovereign creator of the universe. And I think that's one of the things we learn from Habakkuk, that he's not a magician. He's not an illusionist. He's not a ventriloquist. He's not a magic act. That there's some sort of trick that if we understood how he did things, we'd be able to understand him fully. We'll never be able to understand him fully. He's, I don't even know, even if we have eternity, which is no time, the non-existence of time, we'll still never get to understand him. I don't even know whether we'll get to understand each other, because we'll discover just how wonderfully complex we are in the new creation. So, the book of Habakkuk. I'm also beginning to change my mind as the more I look at this book. I want to say to you, it's okay to change your mind about a book as you read it. As it should change, shouldn't it? As you study it more deeply. In the e-blast to promote the Bible study, I talked about this book being a dialogue. It's how to grow faith through questions and answers. And I was just reflecting on how difficult it is to say, I don't know. Especially when you're the one doing the Bible study teaching, you feel an obligation to at least pretend that you know. And yet, as another old and wise, I used to call her my Jewish fairy godmother, Helen McIntosh. She'd been a Jewish believer, and she was sort of in her 70s when I met her, and she'd been a Jewish believer for about 50 years by that time. And I used to ask her questions, and she used to say, I don't know. I found that very disappointing, because I needed answers to everything. And then I met another person later on who told me, crucify the reason why. Because I was asking so many whys that the whys weren't getting me anywhere. I wasn't getting answers to my question. Well, Habakkuk, I'm beginning to think, is not it's not an oracle and a psalm that he wrote in response. But I'm beginning to see it as one vision. Fiona and I both said how difficult it is to stay in the section that we're supposed to stay in, that we find ourselves sliding backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And even as I am talking, I'm thinking about that first session where we looked at the end. Though the fig tree does not bud, there are no grapes on the vine, the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food. There are no sheep in the pen, no cattle in the stalls. We could all talk about periods in our lives where we'd lost our physical health, where we'd lost our mental health, where we'd lost our job, where our kids had suddenly all moved home because they'd been thrown out. That literally happened last week. Friends had their family move back into their house because their kids were made homeless. How do we keep a grasp of things? How do the righteous keep their faith when the world feels like it's falling apart? Habakkuk has an answer to that. And I think what Habakkuk sees is almost like a film of an interview. It's a film, it's an interview. So I don't know if you remember, some of you will have watched Emma Maitlis interviewing Prince Andrew. Like staggeringly brilliant piece of interviewing where I learned as much, if not, I learned a lot about Emily Maitlis in that interview. And I learned something about both people that I could never have seen if one of them had been talking and then the other had been talking. The same is true in a less serious way, I think, for the older people in the group. You won't believe that I can remember this, but I can remember Parkinson interviewing Rod Hull. Not just Rod Hull, but Emu. There's something you learn from an interview that you don't learn from just a speech. And what we've got in the book of Habakkuk is an interview that took place between God and his prophet. And what's remarkable is that it's really just about those two. You know, we've spent so much time in the minor prophets looking, haven't we? We looked at Jonah, and we thought, gosh, Nineveh are going to get away with it. Then we looked at Nahum. We discovered they didn't get away with it. We've already discovered in Habakkuk that the Babylonians are coming to. And in fact, Habakkuk deals both with the invasion of the Babylonians and a further invasion, but we get to watch it's like a train. I think maybe it's like a training session. Habakkuk gets to see what it would. Habakkuk gets to see himself as, I don't know, as a character being interviewed to see something that he couldn't otherwise see. Last week we looked. We had this thing, Habakkuk's first complaint or question. That's the one that Fiona dealt with, and I love it because it's so desperately needy. My wife sometimes calls me needy husband. If I need her to do something and she doesn't want to do it, she calls me needy husband, and that gets her out of it because I feel by the time I've realized I've been tricked, the opportunity it's gone and I've lost. So, but look at this needy prophet. How long must I call for help? You don't listen. I cry out violence to you, but you don't say. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate? It's not exactly falling back into teenage mode, but this is a very me-focused thing, isn't it? Even if I don't put the vocal emphasis on it, you can see I'm calling for help, you don't listen. That's a child talking to a parent, isn't it? Maybe that's the way to see that. It's not true. I am listening. You don't understand me. You're not doing your GCSEs. You don't remember what it's like. Oh my goodness, I've just said the exact opposite. I remember being exactly where you were. So his first complaint is, how can I continue to be a prophet when I don't feel like you hear me? I don't feel like you know me. I feel like I'm on my own. Remember Moses saying, I'm not going anywhere unless you come with us. And it allows us to see that it's possible to speak freely to God in a way that perhaps doesn't make us look great. But I, as the parent of a teenager who is extremely difficult, I would choose some dialogue over no dialogue at all. I've got another friend in ministry, and one of their kids has gone to live in a Satan worship house which is it's a satanic cult house. And there's virtually no dialogue between him and his son, and in fact anyone else in his family. So the first thing that I want to show you is that this is a book about dialogue and where dialogue leads. Where does dialogue lead? Alan, who's in this group, we first met over 10 years ago talking about a book called Conversations with God. And this this is actually a conversation between a prophet and his God. It's exactly like us calling out in distress, not praying like we pray when we're in the prayer meeting when everyone's listening to us. But we're praying like when we're in a hole and we feel like everything's gone wrong. There was a song, Shirley Bassey sang a song, if there's a wrong way to do it. Do you remember that song? If there's a wrong way to do it, nobody does it like me. Do you remember that? If there's a wrong bell, I ring it. A wrong note, I sing it. Nobody does it like me. Everything I choose, I go. When everything you've done, every choice you've made feels like you've made the wrong choice, that's a great time to pray like Habakkuk prayed in his first complaint. And the other thing I wanted to show you was that the Lord's answer is consistent with the Lord's answer in the book of Job. He says to Habakkuk, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. I think there's something of a joke there, because Habakkuk has been focused on his world and his people and his mess. That's what he's focused on. That's what we're often focused on. God's first response is to say, look at the nations and watch. Well, you can't. See what's going to happen. Oh, no, I can't. Do you remember that that's also the way that God spoke to Job? And Job eventually understood and repented in ashes, in grief and ashes, in humility. And the process beyond that was his restoration, which is what Fiona was talking about before we got going, about how God takes us through trials to lead us into restoration. But tonight, we're looking really from chapter 1, verse 12 onwards. Let me read it to you. O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will not die. O Lord, you've appointed them to execute judgment. O Rock, you have ordained them to punish. There's so much in this little bit of text to see. It's still the same. He's still talking to the same person. How long, O Lord, must I call for help? O Lord, are you not from everlasting? So it's still somebody calling out to a personal God. But have you noticed that the subject has changed? The subject now is God and his character. Instead of his circumstances, his situation, this second prayer begins by focusing on God's character. And what can we learn about the God just from this little verse? Well, O Lord, Yod He Vav He, that's the personal name of God. Are you not from everlasting is a rhetorical way to say you're from eternity, you're beyond time. What he's doing is, in prayer, if I was doing it, I might say, goodness me, I'm totally overwhelmed by my circumstances and situation, but I know you stand outside of time and you see things eternally, and I know you've got a plan for me because you've told me you have, and you've told me that you've got a plan for good, a plan to prosper me, not to hurt me. My God. So often we hear people say, oh my God, in culture. And we forget how precious it is to have the sovereign creator of the universe as our God. No one can snatch us from his hand because he's unimaginably powerful. Creation doesn't come out of nothing. It comes from somebody, someone, or some three, if you want to call it the Trinity, if you don't like thinking of it that way. So he's a personal, eternal God, and he's my Holy One. He's my Holy One. And holy is a great word. He's not part of creation. He's separate from it. He's not like us. He's separate from us. He makes a way to be with us because we could never make a way to be with him because he's holy. And he can only say to us, be holy because I am holy in Leviticus and in 1 Peter, because he's made it possible. You will not die. The translators, my NIV says, my God, my Holy One, we will not die. And the reason they made it about us not dying was because they didn't even want to entertain the notion that God could die. If you think about the idea of God dying, oh no, it makes more sense if we don't die, because as long as we're in faith with him, we don't die, we're connected to the eternal. And actually, it's just saying that our God transcends the category of time, of holiness, and of life and death. He transcends all those categories. So what we see in this second complaint, is Habakkuk recognizing the character of God and then he says, given all that's true, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? I don't mean this irreverently, but if it's a bit like he seems to be coming very close to calling God a hypocrite. He's challenging God and saying, if this is who you are, how is what I see possible? Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. That's true. He is a just God. But what appears to be tolerating evil is actually love-driven patience. There's an old joke about God in a cafe talking to a friend, and this guy comes in and he interrupts the conversation and he's rude to everybody and he's just leery and doesn't listen and really annoying. And the God's friend kind of gets getting increasingly wound up. How can this guy behave like this in the cafe with the sovereign creator of the universe present? Doesn't he know anything? Blah, 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 blah. And he gets increasingly wound up. And the guy eventually storms out and walks out. the friend starts apologizing to the sovereign creator of the universe. And the sovereign creator is saying, I don't know how you managed to put up, I couldn't put up with that any longer. I just had, after half an hour, I'd had enough of him. And God said to this friend, you couldn't put up with him for half an hour, but I put up with him for 78 years. Habakkuk is confusing. He's getting confused by a thing called the creature-creator distinction. Hands up if you understand what that means, and I don't have to explain it. Okay, I'll try and explain it. It just means that there's a line between the creator, God, the sovereign creator of the universe, and his creature. We're the creatures, he's the creator. There's a line in between the two that you cannot cross as a creature. And when you cross over into the creator, when you start thinking you're the creator, you forget the creator-creation distinction, or the creator-creature distinction, and you become like a, the best illustration I think I've got of it is that you become like a wobbly wheel on a car. You know, when your wheels haven't been balanced, and you go on the motorway for the first time, and you get to 70 or whatever, 65, 70, because no one would go over 70. I certainly never have. And suddenly the wheel starts going like this, and the steering wheel's like that, and you think, oh, I'm either going to have to slow down to 70 or go up to 90 because it'll go away then. And obviously I have to slow down to 70. But when we forget who God is and we have forgotten who we are, we're like the unbalanced wheel. And then you take the wheel, you go back to the garage, and the man puts he puts weights on the wheel, and suddenly it spins perfectly again. That's when you get the difference between him and us right. And when you get the difference between him and us wrong, wobbly wheel on the motorway. So the next time you drive up the road and you find you need your wheels balancing, you've got an illustration right there of God's presence in your life. And his eyes are his eyes too pure to look on evil? I don't know, are they? I mean, he sees evil and he's going to punish it. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know if he even has eyes. I don't think he does in that sense. So perhaps that's not entirely accurate. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Sometimes you look up a word that you think you know and you think, wow, that's so interesting. Treacherous. Likely to betray a trust. A person is treacherous if they're likely to betray a trust. Remember last week or the week before, we talked about he gives us feet that enable us to stand like a deer up on the steep cliffs right at the very end of the book. Well, treacherous is something that provides insecure footing. It's the very opposite of what God is. If you want to put the word treacherous on one side of the line of the creator-creature divide, guess which side it goes on? Very firmly on our side. Treacherous people are hazardous and dangerous and unpredictable to have in your life. But Jesus handed himself over to exactly those kinds of people. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Habakkuk could never have seen Jesus on the cross saying, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they've done." Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? How do you know that you're more, how can you make that judgment, first of all? How do we know are we in a position to be able to fairly judge whether the Babylonian armies, who are physically amoral, brutal, greedy, grabbing, bloodthirsty army, how can we judge that they're more wicked than the Judah, who've seen their sister dragged into exile and are full of idolatry and rebellion against God? But it is often, isn't it, our perspective that the righteous are swallowed up while the wicked prosper. Psalm 73, amongst many, I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They're free from the burdens common to man. They're not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace, and they clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Evil conceits in their mind, no limit. That's what the wicked are like, always carefree. They increase their wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure. In vain I've washed my hands in innocence. And yet, eventually, what the psalmist will see is the fate of the wicked. But what he sees at the moment is men being like fish in the sea, swept up, and the wicked pulling up and catching, gathering this great empire. And instead of rejoicing in the glory of God, who has given him this opportunity, he rejoices in his ability to produce wealth from his business, from his fishing business. So he lives in luxury, destroying nations without mercy. Never wondering, always thinking that it was his strength that allowed him to do this, not knowing that he was an instrument of judgment in the hands of the sovereign creator of the universe. It's really striking in these two sections that we're seeing Proverbs 21, the hearts of the king are in God's hands. He guides them wherever he wishes, as someone guides a watercourse. We're seeing that applies to wicked, the king of Assyria, the king of Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, the Putins, the guy in Turkey whose name I can never pronounce, the Bidens, the Reagans, whatever. Doesn't matter what kind of a leader you are, whether you're a pharaoh or a philanthropist, he can guide you without you knowing. And he'll hand you over to if success is your God, he'll hand you over to it. That's what he did with the Babylonians. So what he's doing in this complaint is saying, okay, God, you're great and you're powerful and you're righteous and you're eternal and everything else. But as I look at you, I think you're too tolerant. I think you're too kind. I think you're being too patient with these people. And I think I'm right. And I'm going to stand here, he says. I'll stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts, and I'll look to see what you're going to say. I'll see what answer you're going to give to my question. I came to faith by asking God a question. Show me you're real and you're in control, because I know that I'm real and in control, and I want to believe in you, but unless you prove it to me, I'm not going to believe in you. I came to faith the next day, having discovered that I wasn't in control, that actually even the thing I loved the most, I couldn't protect. And as I realized this tragedy that I was in was an answer to my own prayer, I was overwhelmed by the fact that his ways were not my ways, that he'd been patiently waiting 39 years for me to finally see the truth. So I don't know how long you had to stand and wait and watch on the ramparts. I waited 39 years. And in many ways, I've got more questions now than I had before. And we haven't even got to his answer. We haven't even got to his answer, and it's time for me to finish. But I wanted to spend some time sharing with you what I've been seeing as I've looked and looked and looked and looked at this. Because the book of Habakkuk is about faith, and it's about the power of faith to achieve human transformation. But you can only know more when you realize that you don't know everything. And that's what I saw in these two complaints, was Habakkuk saying, okay, first of all, I don't know what's going on and I can't cope, and that's the first complaint. And now as he's calmed down and he's seeing who God is, he still doesn't understand, given that you are righteous, holy, perfect, sovereign, loving God, how is it possible that you seem to tolerate the wicked more than the righteous? How does that, and Fiona talked about that last week as well. It's a key thing. But what I wanted us to see tonight was this is an interview with God and his prophet, as the prophet is rehabilitated in his ministry, because he'll be able to say he'll come out of this in chapter 3 worshiping, and so he'll be able to give genuine counsel to the people coming into the temple who have the same issues as he does. These people come to religious leaders, to priests, to whatever, pastors, whatever, with the false expectation that somehow we know more. And often we take on the responsibility of giving that impression. Whereas even today, before we started this Bible study, what really helps us is where we see that our struggles and our disappointments and our errors and our mistakes are not something that we should hide, but something that we should share. And as we share these failures and weaknesses, we build trust. It actually builds faith. It's counterintuitive, but actually it builds faith. Because I don't have to pretend anymore to be Superman. I tell you, it's exhausting. I'm not even very good at it. Introverts are much better at pretending to be Supermen than extroverts. But introverts have more difficulty sharing personal things a lot of the time. They're no less broken. We just broke different ends of the same broken stick. So why has Habakkuk been recorded in Scripture? To show us that our conversations with God are a safe space. To show us that Habakkuk's struggles, as we read Habakkuk's struggles, we've either been in those situations or we will be in those situations. And I want to tell you that is a great bridge to build on. We're not Manchester City streaking away, greatest football team in the Premier League. We're Southampton, doomed to be relegated. And as soon as we realise that and start saying, oh yeah, I feel really bad, I let that goal in the other day, or I missed that penalty, or I gave away the thing, I didn't listen to the as soon as our weaknesses, Paul says that he reveled in his weaknesses in order that God could be more glorified. John the Baptist, I must become less, Jesus gets greater. Who can approach God? Only the contrite and humble in heart. Better to be in the house of the mourning than the house of celebrating. Blessed is he who mourns, for they'll become. All that stuff begins to make sense then. And being in that, being lifted out of that. There's nothing like being lifted out of the pit to help you appreciate standing on dry land. So I hope that's been helpful. I'm going to finish now and give you the freedom to ask me any questions.